Hello, very beautiful community. The White House and the Kremlin have been semi-secretly consulting about a peace plan for Ukraine, a peace proposal that looks incredibly Putinist. So let's read the story very briefly together in the Financial Times and react. US and Russian officials draw new peace plans for Ukraine. The Trump administration and Russian officials have straight away a question. What is the Trump administration, right? Who is doing this? And I imagine we'll have to come back to that later. The Trump administration and Russian officials have drawn up a sweeping new proposal to end Russia's war in Ukraine that envisages major concessions by Kyiv and have urged President Vladimir Zelenskyy to accept it, according to people briefed on the effort. A group of Russian and American officials were involved in creating the plan, which is still at a framework stage. A person familiar with the talks told the Financial Times. One of its architects is Kirill Dmitriev, the head of Russia's sovereign wealth fund and a close ally of Vladimir Putin. People familiar with the proposal said. The plan was conveyed to Kyiv this week by US President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff, who met the current Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine and former Defense Minister Mr. Umerov in Miami to go over its 28 points, two people familiar with the talks said. They added Witkoff had made clear he wanted Zelenskyy to accept the terms, even though they included points that have been red lines for Ukraine. We'll say a little bit more about this, but the lead story here isn't actually about Ukraine. The lead story here is about US Imperial decline. That you've got somebody who is not just ludicrously pro-Russian in disposition, as Mr. Witkoff is, but somebody who is ludicrously professionally unsuited to the task that Mr. Trump has given them, performing this task for what is supposed to be the most powerful country in the world. I mean, this is farce. And this is not farce as in these bunch of clowns happen to arrive on the stage. It's functional farce. Right? It's not contingent farce, because clowns arrive when democracies decline. And when democracies decline, state capacity erodes. And when state capacity erodes, clowns arrive. So we're witnessing imperial decline here. So this is a bigger historical story than just Witkoff shouldn't be doing what he's doing. He shouldn't be doing his job. One of the people said it would amount to Ukraine giving up its sovereignty if Kyiv accepted the plan, and called the effort a Russian attempt to play the Trump administration, which they added was eager to show progress on a deal. So the Russians are extremely interested in showing readiness, in the appearance of readiness to make a deal, because they want to minimize US economic pressure on Russia. Now check this out. So this is Steve Witkoff writing a respond tweet and then deleting it, saying he must have got this from K, and K is Kirill Dmitriev. So what Steve Witkoff is thinking there is it is clearly sending a private message, and then he's realized that this is not a DM. So look, we wouldn't criticize him for not knowing how Twitter works if he knew how to negotiate and wasn't ludicrously pro-Russian, but given that he can't negotiate and is ludicrously pro-Russian, we can mock him for the fact that he can't even use Twitter. I mean, this is imperial decline in action, this screenshot. According to people with knowledge of a document about the draft plan, it would require Ukraine to cede the remainder of the eastern Donbass region, including land currently under Kyiv's control, and cut the size of its armed forces by half. So that would constitute a loss of sovereignty, because you can't maintain your sovereignty without an adequate defense force, and it would be a recipe for another Russian invasion. And so the problem is, how are you going to expect Kiev to accede to this if what you're essentially offering them is a choice between slow erosion in a war of attrition versus a guaranteed scenario of not being able to withstand a future possible and perhaps even likely Russian invasion? You're not going to choose that second scenario unless you're deranged. Crucially, it also calls for Ukraine to abandon key categories of weaponry, and would include the rollback of US military assistance that has been vital to its defense, potentially leaving the country vulnerable to future Russian aggression. Additionally, no foreign troops would be allowed on Ukrainian soil, and Kyiv would no longer receive Western long-range weapons that can reach deep inside Russia. The plan would also stipulate that Russian be recognized as an official state language in Ukraine and grant formal status to the local branch of the Russian Orthodox Church, provisions echoing long-standing Kremlin political objectives. So don't underestimate the importance of these political objectives the Kremlin has about Ukraine's internal politics, because its central political aspirations in Ukraine are political, not territorial. One person familiar with the document described it as a very generic one that was heavily tilted toward Russia. Another person briefed on the plan called it very comfortable for Putin. I mean, this is just the replication of Russia's previously held position without any significant change. It's not a plan, but a mix of real practical proposals with good intentions, a Russian person familiar with the matter said. Part of it is absolutely unacceptable for Ukrainians. Officials in Kyiv briefed on the plan said it aligned with Kremlin maximalist demands, adding it would be a non-starter for Ukraine without significant changes. But one of the people briefed on the proposal was less pessimistic, saying the Americans are pressing Moscow to clearly articulate what their expectations are to start with, and then intending to go on from there. The proposal comes as Zelenskyy's political position in Ukraine has weakened amid a widening corruption scandal involving several close allies. The fallout has emboldened opposition figures and triggered dissent from several of his Servant of the People party. Some MPs have publicly called for the dismissal of the president's chief of staff, the enormously powerful Mr. Yermak, and proposed a unity government that would dilute Zelenskyy's authority. So, with Zelenskyy's inner circle being implicated in unsurprising but astonishing corruption, Zelenskyy is actually in a position where he is less, not more likely to make pro-Russian concessions, because him being immersed in this corruption scandal and in the middle of it acceding to some kind of hasty Kremlinite deal that Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Dmitriev concocted, with Mr. Witkoff's indulgence, that's not a political starter. So it works the other way, actually. Zelenskyy is less likely to make pro-Russian concessions in his current predicament of vulnerability. But it's also given Washington a window of opportunity to apply renewed pressure on the Ukrainians to reach a deal on terms that would be less favorable. The Kremlin and the spokesperson for Dmitriev did not immediately reply to requests for comment. The White House did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The existence of the plan was reported by Axios. So there are two poles here, right, looking at this piece. One is that Dmitriev and Witkoff came up with something, and numerous people in the Trump administration don't agree with it. That's one poll. Another poll is that this is more of a full press on Ukraine that has Mr. Trump's backing. What would be my, and I've actually seen experts take both sides today. What's my analysis? My analysis is that this does not have Trump's backing, because Mr. Trump is someone who enormously struggles to keep several things in mind at the same time. He has monofocus when there's anything like a crisis or a low-level crisis, and he has one with the Epstein files at the moment. So I think he's thinking about that overwhelmingly. And I don't think he has the mental space to do anything about Ukraine right now. He could have, at a stretch, said, hey guys, hey Witkoff, go try again. But that's it. So I don't think Trump is on top of what has been put forward in this proposal. That would be my analysis. But this doesn't change the big picture, that fundamentally the aspiration of Mr. Trump is to bring it about that a peace deal that happens is more about Russia's relationship with the United States than it is about Ukraine, and that there's a kind of realignment, not necessarily a return to any recent past, but a move toward much greater interpenetration between Russia and the United States, and considerable alliance that Mr. Trump would never call that, but that I would call ideological alliance, ideologically based bridging. Now, the trouble for Mr. Trump is that he is the president of a politically pluralistic country, a pluralism he's trying to asphyxiate, but it still means he can't do what he wants on Ukraine. And it also means that he can't, because he's in the real world, he can't get Ukraine to do whatever he wants, because Ukraine is always going to choose the least worst option available to it. It's not going to choose a maximalist Russian proposal if it's worse than the status quo. So that's how I'd read the big picture with Trump. Trump is narcissistically dependent and ideologically allied with Putin, but I'm not saying, and I'm on balance judging that it's more likely that Trump is not behind this. Now, the big story, however, remains decline. The big story remains that the clownishness of Witkoff in his role is non-contingent, right? We're watching the erosion of state capacity. And when you lose state capacity, you lose the capacity to act coherently on the international stage. You lose the capacity to even have a position you're pursuing consistently. That's what we're witnessing with US power. So this is all a commentary on US decline. Lots of love, talk soon.